So, hi everyone. Today's unit that we're doing is Unit 7, which is to look at its business law. And today we're going to be looking at Learning Outcome 2, which is to illustrate the potential impact of the law on a business. In the last session, which was Learning Outcome 1, we looked at defining what a legal system was. We also looked at the purpose of law and the evolution of law, and we looked at different sources of law, legislation, case law, primary sources, secondary sources. We looked at the key terminology in regards to the division of law. So how law works and the different divisions. So the court structure. Does anyone remember what kind of courts we have in place? Does anyone remember? Nandish, do you remember any of the courts?
The House of Lords was one of them, and the tribunal
That's
services.
not the court, though, is it? The House of Lords is not the court.
Okay.
The court would be Ishika. Do you know any? Do you remember any?
No.
Remember the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court? We looked at the Magistrates Court, the High Court, the Crown Court. These are the divisions of the legal system, so the courts. We looked at the difference between civil and criminal law. Does anyone remember the difference between civil and criminal law?
Yeah, basically the difference is in the severity of the case.
Okay. And what
like a murder is placed in criminal law and possibly theft is placed in civil law.
Okay, but for civil law, do you get a remedy? What kind of remedies do you get?
Redressing.
Okay, and what about criminal law?
Punishment, probably like imprisonment.
Yeah. So then we looked at the justice system. So we looked at the role of the court in lawmaking, and also we looked at the organisation of the judiciary. And we watched that video on the Supreme Court, and Lady Hale identified the role and the organisation of the judiciary within the Supreme Court. She identified the issues that are around that no one is above the law, and that applies to the rule of law. She also looked at the judicial appointment, and she also identified the importance of having this judicial system within the UK. So today we're going to be looking at illustrating the potential impact of law on businesses. So firstly, the indicative content. So we look at the impact of law, contract law, how the formation of contracts, the elements and terms of a contract, competition law, data protection, the tort of negligence, consumer protection, health and safety, and product liability. We're going to also look at the duties of employer and employee. So the employment contract, employer obligations, and employee rights in the workplace. So firstly, we'll go on to look at some key terminology. So we're going to look at the impact of law. So law protects our general safety and ensures our rights as citizens against abuses by other people, by organisations, and by the government itself. We have laws to help provide for our general safety. These exist at local, state, and national levels and include things like laws about food safety. Why do you think we need laws in place?
Basically, so that society can function.
Okay, basically the society can function. And what do you think the impact of having a law is? What's the reasoning behind it?
To maintain order, prevent any harm to citizen of the country.
Yeah, to maintain order, to maintain that there's safety for the individual of the country. Now, when we look at impact of law, it's trying to look at ensuring rights and protection of citizens. But then you have impact on law and businesses. How is that how is that important? We're going to go through it a little bit more, so you've got a bit more idea. But why is it important to have legislation on businesses? So the government uses legislation to regulate businesses' behaviour and prevent them from exploiting people. So laws protect consumers who buy from businesses and workers employed by businesses. So what comes to mind when you talk about a business exploiting people? What does that mean? How can a business exploit someone? So I'll give you an example. Businesses can exploit people by obviously looking at things like wages. So if you, Nandish, work for the same organization and you are being exploited from because you're from a different country, okay, so they're giving you £5 an hour and the minimum wage is £10 an hour. Is that fair?
No.
No, so they're exploiting people, they're making people work more hours, they may be giving less money. So this is why laws are needed to protect individuals, employers, and also to regulate the business. So I've got a video here that we can watch, and this looks at the impact of legislation on businesses, okay? So I'll just... So did the video actually identified negative and positive points in regard to having legislation and the consequences for not following the legislation? So, you know, I mean, what did you think about the video? Was it quite interesting in looking at the impact if you follow legislation? You know, the whole point is that the government want you to follow legislation so you are meeting the requirements, what the legislation states. So that's some of the positive impacts. What about some of the negative impacts from the video? What could happen?
It is an extra cost to the businesses, and the negative
Yeah.
impact is that they can do tax evasion or
Yeah.
break minimum wage laws, etc.
Yeah. So the different laws in place, like national minimum wage, and also some negative impact would be like, you know, bad reputation, bad publicity, you know, and your business being shut down. You may get fined, you may have to pay compensation to employers. So these are the impact of law on businesses, and that's why government have these laws in place so that business can run smoothly and the legislation is put in place. And another really, really important piece of legislation is health and safety. You know, you need to keep health and safety of your employers. Why do you need to keep everything in place in regards to health and safety? Why do you think health and safety is so important?
So that no physical harm or mental harm can be done to the employee.
Yes. Yes. So, you know, whichever environment you're working in, no physical harm can be done to you. Okay, so now we'll just carry on with the rest. Sorry? Hello? Okay. So businesses will affected by a number of pieces of legislation, such as we mentioned, the health and safety legislation. So when working environment is dangerous, a business will be accountable for the safety of the employees. This means that it will need to ensure that a minimum standard of safety is adhered to. Another one is employment legislation, and here governments often pass legislation that protects people when they're at work. This will entitle individuals to minimum wages, capped working hours, protection from any sort of discrimination, as we discussed a little bit yesterday in Learning Outcome 1, and equal opportunity. Environmental legislation. So here governments can impose rules on businesses to ensure they work on certain standards in order to protect the earth. This may include restrictions on the amount of greenhouse gases that can be released, how many pollutants can be put into the earth, and the methods used in production. Taxes and subsidies. Governments can impose taxes and fines on businesses if they do not work in a manner that is desirable. Taxes and fines will be imposed that can be heavy. For subsidies can also be given for businesses that work in a manner which is preferred. So contract law. So contract law is a body of law that applies to rights and obligations of the contractual parties under a contract. It governs the relationship, validity, and interpretation of an agreement between two or more persons. So it could be the individual, companies, or organizations. And regarding the sale of goods, the provision of services, or exchange of interests or ownership. So we're going to look at now is the formation of contracts. The formation of a contract begins with an offer. This may be, for instance, an offer of money in exchange for goods, or an offer of services in exchange for other services, or even the promise of a future payment of money or something else in exchange for a service. It is an expression of a willingness to agree terms between the parties. An offer allows the other party to accept the offer, providing the basis of a formal agreement, or the party can refuse the offer and make a counter-offer. Such an offer must be communicated to the other party. Someone will not be treated in law as having accepted an offer if they have not had actual or constructive knowledge of it. The elements of a contract. For a contract to be valid and recognised by common law, it must include certain elements which are offer, acceptance, consideration, intention to create legal relations, authority and capacity, and certainty. Without these elements, a contract is not legally binding and may not be enforced by the courts. The elements are the terms of a contract. A contract term is any provision or term that forms part of a contract. Each of these terms provides a contractual obligation which can lead to litigation if breached. Every contract a business enters will have critical terms that fall into various categories. An employment contract usually includes express terms, specific terms that are usually put in writing. For example, the employee's pay or working hours is an implied term. For example, things that are so obvious, they do not need to be written down, and terms that come from an employment law. So why is it important to have a contract in place for employment law?
Basically, it sets out an legally binding document so that
Yeah,
if breached can be challenged in court.
it's a legally binding document that can be challenged, can't it? For future, for the fact that if someone's not paid the right wages, or if someone's not given the right working hours, or even the right holidays, this can all be challenged then because it's a legal document. So what is competition law? UK competition law is designed to stop anti-competitive behaviour of consisting anti-competitive agreements, abuse of a dominant market position, and the competition law is contained in chapters 1 and 2 of the Competition Act 1998 and is policed by Competition Markets Authority CMA. UK competition law is designed to protect the underdog, consumer or business from anti-competitive agreements or abuse of dominant market positions. If your business is a market leader, you cannot afford to ignore competition law because the significant penalties for non-compliance. Why do you think competition law is so important?
Because one of the things that comes to my mind is price regulation.
Yeah, okay.
Only if no competition exists, the pricing for the customers is very skewed.
Yeah. And does it make the business better or not?
Sometimes it does if it brings new talents or
Yeah.
way of working, but some for other companies it suppresses them.
Yeah. If your business trades internationally, you also need to be aware of the domestic competition in the country where you are trading and the EU competition law contained in Article 101 and 102 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU, which is referred to as TFEU. For example, if your company faces a cartel investigation, it could be subject to CMA and Article 101 investigations if alleged anti-competitive conduct took place in the UK and an EU member state. But because we're not part of the EU, some of this may not apply in regards to competition law. Data protection. Now, data protection is really important in regards to, someone's data, the process, or it's the process of safeguarding important information from corruption or compromise or loss. The importance of data protection increases as the amount of data created and stored continues to grow at unprecedented rates. Why do you think data protection is so important?
To maintain privacy for their employees.
It's for what, sorry?
Maintain privacy for their employees and prevent doxing for them.
Already. Okay. So it maintains privacy for the employees. Okay. It also, what is it there to do? Protect what kind of data?
It can be address, phone number, contact
Yes.
information,
Yeah.
social security number.
Yeah. Why is it so important to protect that kind of data?
To prevent
Basically,
fraud and cybercrime.
Yeah, excellent. To prevent Ishika, fraud and cybercrime. Do you think that's growing now? Do you think, Ashika, do you think that's growing in this country? In any country?
In any country?
Do you think cybercrime is growing?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you think more people are doing fraudulent activities due to cybercrime?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. So many people, and what about, the introduction of AI? Do you think that has an impact on this data protection? Do you know what AI is?
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence. Why do you not think it has why do you think there's no link between AI and data protection? What about Nandish? What do you think? Do you think there's a link?
yeah, definitely. Currently, the models which are trained, like ChatGPT, basically,
Yes, yes,
learn on websites from websites and books and they have not outrightly taken
yes,
permission from their appropriate authors.
yeah. But it's growing very fast, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it's causing a lot of problems in countries, is AI. The fact
yeah,
that, you can commit so much fraud, but the fact that, your voice could be recorded and you could ring. There was a documentary I watched, and there was a man on there and saying that the AI is moving so fast that if I rang my mother, and sorry, if somebody rang my mother with my voice and said that I was in trouble and I needed £5,000, my mother wouldn't know if she's elderly, and she wouldn't know that it's not me.
yeah,
And then
definitely.
she would
Deep fakes, I
transfer,
think the term for that is deep fakes. Deep
yeah,
fakes AI.
yeah, and she would transfer money to my
Yeah,
account because of this AI. So it's working very fast, and it's working at a fast pace, which is affecting a lot of like data protection and GDPR stuff. So we've got the tort of negligence. And the tort of negligence is a legal wrong that is suffered by someone at the hands of another who fails to take proper care to avoid what a reasonable person would regard as foreseeable risk. In many cases, there will be a contractual relationship which is expressed or implied between the parties involved, such as that of doctor and patient, employer and employee, bank and customer, and until relatively recently, it was necessary for such a contractual relationship to exist in order for a claim for negligence to succeed. Can you give me an example of where negligence may occur, an example of something that may be negligent?
probably at a workplace.
Yeah, okay.
One of the things is
What
workplace
would
and
happen at workplace to make it negligent?
proper safety measures if are not taken, for example, by a construction company. They don't provide
Yes,
the appropriate
excellent. Yeah,
equipment.
proper PPE, like you said in the video,
Yeah.
protective gear, like a hard hat or something like that. What about like negligence in the form of a doctor and a patient? How could that be an example?
It can range from a basic human error to appropriate diagnosis.
Yes. Yeah. So it could be things like, a doctor performing an operation on a patient and then leaving something inside the patient's body, maybe a swab or something, and
One
then not.
question.
Sorry?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Uh, does this need to be a conscious act or it can be a mistake?
I think it can be a mistake, but it still would amount to negligent, because they need to be really, really careful
Okay.
what they are doing, because that's part of their job. I've known people where they've put in cases for negligence where the doctor was made a mistake, because consciously, a mistake, even if it's a mistake, it still affected the patient.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really careful in this profession. Consumer protection. Consumer protection is the practice of safeguarding buyers of goods and services and the public against unfair practices in the marketplace. So consumer protection measures are often established by law. Consumers in the UK benefit from a wide range of rights when buying goods and services from businesses based in the UK and the EU. The UK has been influential in the EU in developing these rights, and the UK's 2015 Consumer Rights Act builds on EU consumer law principles. Carrying on from consumer protection, it sets out a coherent framework of consumer protections across the spectrum of consumer goods, services, and digital content supply contracts. Organizations like Citizens Advice Trading Standards and the Competition and Markets Authority, as well as the government, work to ensure that consumers are aware of their rights and what to do when things go wrong. For example, before making an online purchase of goods, consumers in the UK and EU must be given all the key information about the transaction and can cancel the contract and return the goods within 14 days, whether or not they are faulty. They are also protected against a wide range of prohibited, unfair, misleading, and aggressive business practices, many of which are criminal offences and in relation to which a consumer may have a right of redress. Terms in goods and services contracts which are found to be unfair are invalid or non-binding. Health and safety, a really, really important part, as it mentioned in the video, in regards to health and safety. The standard dictionary definition for health and safety is regulations and procedures intended to prevent an accident or injury in the workplace or public environments. The health and safety at work, etc. The purpose of health and safety law is to ensure a safe working environment for employees. In the UK, this requires employers to meet health and safety obligations covered by a vast range of legislation. Health and safety at work encompasses a wide range of duties and responsibilities aimed at maintaining a safe working environment for employees. There are many pieces of legislation and case law. In the UK, the Health and Safety Executive is the government agency which advises on legislation and guidance and enforces this legislation. Product liability. Product liability is the area of law in which manufacturers, distributors, suppliers, and retailers are held responsible for any injuries products cause. Can you give me an example of product liability? Where distributors, suppliers, and retailers are held responsible for any injuries products cause.
I think the latest example can be of Samsung mobile devices,
Yeah,
which their
okay.
battery exploded.
Yes, yeah. And it could be, that is quite bad, isn't it? Because, they were liable as suppliers and distributors to the retailers, and it was the injury of, to people. Regardless of any contractual limitations of liability, if a product or any of its component parts are defective, its manufacturer may be liable for damage under the Consumer Protection Act CPA, or the common law of negligence. Duties of employer. In any workplace, employers have certain duties to their staff. These are typically legal requirements and relate to fairness in the workplace, limitations on what they can ask of staff, and health and safety considerations. If you work for an employer, understanding their duties can help you better understand your rights. In this article, we will explain what employee duties are and list some of them. If you're wondering what an employer's duties are regarding its staff, gaining knowledge of this can help you know what to expect of them in the workplace. An employer's duties are the various responsibilities they have to their staff in the workplace. They may include the responsibility to ensure that the work environment is safe for the staff, that they provide legal minimum benefits and pay, treat staff fairly, and employ fair recruitment practices. Duty of employees. In a nutshell, employees are responsible for taking reasonable care of their own safety, their own health and safety, cooperating with you, their employer, and following instructions, not putting others in danger, and report any hazards, illnesses, or injuries. So that's an employee's duty to the employer. The employment contract. All employees have an employment contract with their employer. A contract is an agreement that sets out an employee's employment rights, conditions, responsibilities, and duties. These are called terms of the contract. Employees and employers must stick to a contract until it ends. For example, by an employer or employee giving notice, or an employee being dismissed, until the terms are changed, usually by agreement between the employee and employer. Employer rights and obligations. As an employer, you're responsible for making sure your business follows the relevant regulations for your industry. While they may vary depending on the type of job and employment contract in place, the regulations form the basis for fair treatment in the workplace. Your responsibilities as an employer include fair recruitment practice, written particulars of employment, usually, as we mentioned earlier, in the form of a contract, health and safety, working time regulations, and holiday and minimum wage. Employer rights and obligations. Fair treatment which prevents claims of discrimination. Your duty to consider requests for flexible working hours. What do you think that is? There's been an increase in that, flexible working hours. What is that?
Basically, the place and time of the working.
When you look at flexible working hours, can people change their working hours? Is that what it means?
Yes.
Yes. So if you have a child and you want to work from 8 till 4 instead of 9 till 5, you can discuss this. If you want to work 3 days and do all your hours in 3 days or 4 days instead of doing a 5th day, you could discuss this with your employer. And there's been an increase in that. Your duty to grant maternity leave and pay paternity leave and pay parental leave and allow staff to return to the same job. Abiding by express and implied contractual terms, informing and consulting when changes are made, auto-enrollment into a pension, and terminating a contract fairly. All of the responsibilities derive from UK employment law, and your failure to meet the appropriate standards could result in a grievance or a claim being made against you or your business. Dismissal. Dismissal is when the employer ends your employment. They do not always have to give you notice. If you dismissed, your employer must show that they've a valid reason that they can justify, acted reasonably in the circumstances. They must also be consistent, for example, not dismiss you for doing something that they let other employers do. They have investigated the situation fully before dismissing you. For example, if a complaint was made about you. If you're part-time or fixed-term worker, you cannot be treated less favorably than a full-time or permanent employee. Are businesses always fair in this situation? Or do they sometimes just dismiss on the basis that they want to dismiss? Do you think they follow the law?
They do try to follow the law, but there can be some malicious intent sometimes.
Yes, Yes, they can. Sometimes there is, and sometimes they don't give you a reason why they've dismissed you. Managing cases of dismissal. If an employer dismisses an employee, they should tell you, the employer, why they've been dismissed, when their employment contract will end, when their employment contract, their notice period, if there is one, their right to appeal the decision, and it's a good idea to put it all in writing to the employee to cover your own back. An employer must put the reasons in writing for an employee who's pregnant or on maternity leave, regardless of how long they've been employed. Other employees have the right to ask their employer for a written statement giving the reasons for their dismissal if they have employment status, have been employed for 2 years. If an employee asks, their employer must give them reasons in writing within 14 days. An employer can appeal against a dismissal. If the employer does not follow a fair and reasonable procedure, the employee might be able to make a claim for unfair dismissal, even if the reason for dismissal was valid. Why is it important that the employer, follow the correct procedure? Why do you think it's so important that they follow the correct procedure?
To minimize unfairness.
Yeah, to minimize any sort of unfair dismissal, because they will be going to a tribunal if there was any sort of discrimination or anything. Managing cases of redundancy. So redundancy is a special form of dismissal, which happens when an employer needs to reduce the size of its workforce. In the UK, an employer is dismissed for redundancy if the employer has ceased or intends to cease continuing the business, or the requirements for employees to perform work of a specific type or to conduct it at the location in which they are employed has ceased or diminished or are expected to do so. If there's a genuine redundancy, employers must follow a correct procedure and make redundancy and notice period payments. Employers in redundancy cases should take all reasonable steps to avoid any sort of redundancies. Manage redundancies legally and in a way that minimizes the potential adverse impact on both those who lose their jobs and the survivors. Implement a communication strategy to ensure that everyone in the organization has correct information about any redundancies. It's so important when it comes to any organization in regards to following redundancy policies. Why do you think it's so important? Why do you think, in some instances, if there are jobs within the organization and someone is made redundant, if a redundancy policy comes into place, why must you, as an organization, offer them other jobs within the organization? Why do you think it's so important? Do you know what redundancy is?
Yeah.
Okay, why do you think it's so important in an organization to follow the procedure for redundancy?
To prevent unfair dismissal of an employee in terms of favoritism for another.
Yeah, to follow, the stages and the process of considering redundancy, because you have to follow that process, because you have to make it fair for the employer, not just the employee, but also the employee and the employer. You have to know your rights. And sometimes redundancy comes into place when a role is no longer needed. So your employer should consider making redundancies as part of the organization, So, for example, because of your performance or conduct, it's not redundancy in this case, it's disciplinary capability. So they can't get rid of you on the basis of redundancy. So, you know, there are organizations like 2P that will be there to help and advise you on redundancies, and ACAS as well. Managing cases of discrimination. So discrimination means treating some people differently from others. It isn't always unlawful. After all, people are paid different wages depending on their status and skills. However, there are certain reasons for which your employer can discriminate against you by law. If a worker says that you or another worker employed by you or your agent have unlawfully been discriminated against them in a work situation, your responsibility as an employer is to deal with the complaint in a way that it finds out if there has been unlawful discrimination, and if there has been, to put the situation right. So a worker may complain to you, make a claim to the employment tribunal, and these are not alternatives, since the person complaining still has the right to make a claim in an employment tribunal if they first complain to you. So what can be forms of discrimination?
On basis of
What is this?
gender or
Sorry?
race, on basis of gender or race.
Yeah.
Uh,
Gender, race, could it be on age, disability?
yeah.
It could be on someone's age, it could be on someone's disability, it could be on the fact that if you're a woman and you are in a job and the same job as a man, and you are both getting paid, sorry, the woman is getting paid less than the man, that is a form of discrimination, especially if you have the same skills and qualifications as that man and you are doing the same job. That is a form of discrimination, and that could be taken to an employment tribunal.
Yeah.
So managing cases of health and safety. Health and safety management is an ongoing process, not a one-off task. It is not enough to just control the risks in your business. You must make sure they stay controlled. Under the management of health and safety at work regulations, every employer must have arrangements for effective planning, organisation, control, monitoring and review of measures to protect people. At every stage of the process, consult with your workers. Involving them will help you develop a positive health and safety culture where risks are controlled sensibly. Managing cases of health and safety. By following the plan, do, check, act approach, you can plan what you need to do. Do the right things to implement your plan. Why is it important to follow this structure of a plan, do, check, act? Why do you think it's so important in an organization when it comes to health and safety? Why do you think health and safety is so important of an employee and an employer? Why do you think it's so important?
It can come down to, if this methodology is not followed, it can come down to the employee or employer's life. So basically, they are the most important.
Yeah, and if they are held liable within an organization, what happens? Are the fines and prison sentences and stuff?
Yes.
So they need to plan what you need to do. They need to do the right things to implement your plan. They need to check your control measures and act if your measures are not working. They will also help you find out where you need to make improvements and take any sort of actions quickly to keep your workers and others safe. They must repeat the process to continually review your arrangements. What I'm going to do now, I've got another video, a short video on health and safety within the workplace, okay? Just give me 1 minute. So when we look at health and safety, the video identified things to us, didn't it? What kind of things did the video identify?
It ranged from following law to basically talking with your team, keeping records, and supervising and training them, and
Why
managing
is it
hazards.
important? Yeah, why is it so important to keep records of everything?
Uh, for possible future litigation against the organization.
Yeah. And to show that you, as an organization, have put the practices in, place.
Yes.
And the video also identified for maintaining a safe working place, also looked at the risks that you should any sort of training that you should give an employee within their job, so that they can identify any sort of risks that are associated with that job, so they know that the risks are in place. It also looked at your mental health and safety as well, because that's so important, and also managing any sort of hazards that are in place. And also working with employers to identify this culture of health and safety. Why is it good to get input from employers? Why do you think it's a good thing to get input from your employees?
Uh, so that first they are comfortable talking about it
Yeah.
in case of
And they
future
can also,
issue.
what do you think? Do you think they can help you come up with, ideas and things like that?
Yeah, potential current issues with the system.
Yeah, they can help you. They can come up with ideas, and they can help you with the managing the health and safety procedures as well. And training is so important. Any sort of training courses or any sort of issues around maintaining a safe environment are so important, and it identified that in the video. So we've finished the session now. Has anyone got any questions?
Not from my side.
Ishika, have you got any questions? Ishika, have you got any questions or anything? So these are some of the references that we've used in today's session. Okay, so these will help you in regards to if you want to have any additional reading. These will be all on Moodle for you to go on and have a look at. And again, that's some preliminary information for you, which we went through, where if you wanted any queries, anything, you would email learnerwork@UK and the submission of the assignment again is learnerwork@UK Ishika, have you got any questions or anything?
No, I have no question. But
Okay. Yes.
Unit 7 is not available on the Moodle.
Yes, I think that the resources will be put up on Monday. Okay, if they haven't, just email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll make sure that these are available for you and the recordings are available for you as well. And if there's no questions, thank you for attending today's session. And the next session is next weekend, which is Learning Outcome 3 and Learning Outcome 4 we'll be doing. Thank you for your patience and thank you for attending today's session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
You too. I'll see you next week, everyone. It's same time next week, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.